Welcome to You Are Intuitive, a series of refreshing conversations that feature candid, intimate, and grounded discussions on developing and using intuition in the real world. I am Dana Mahacek, and I am thrilled to be speaking with Naomi Doe Moody today. Naomi is an apprentice folk herbalist who is passionate about using plants to heal herself and others, to connect with the earth, and to honor her ancestors and their wisdom. She lives off the grid in a yurt with her family in southern Vermont and has been practicing and teaching yoga for around 10 years. Naomi is a healer who believes that we can only heal ourselves. She is committed to doing her own shadow work with the support of teachers and plant allies, and she loves magic, tarot, oracles, moon phases, crystals, guides, and Reiki. Naomi firmly believes that chocolate is a food group, which instantly endeared her to me. I learned so much from speaking with her about connecting to and using plants as part of an intuitive practice, and I'm so excited to share our conversation with you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hi, Naomi. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to chat with you about all things intuition. And I guess the starting point that I like to ask people is, first of all, if you consider yourself an intuitive person.
I do consider myself an intuitive person. Yeah.
And have you always considered yourself like, I'm so intuitive, or has this been like a gradual process that you've...
Honestly, I have always considered myself an intuitive person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would have used that language in my youth, but from the time I was very, very young, I at the time called it like psychic or ESP, but I definitely was very attuned to that kind of awareness from even single digits, 5, 6, 7.
And in the time when you were kind of single digits, experiencing, were you like empathic and like picking up on other people's emotions? Yeah.
Empathic, absolutely. I had very my dreams were like premonitions. I had a lot of dreams that would come to pass, and I also had a lot of communication with other beings with non-corporeal form. You know, we might call them spirit or ghost, but whatever imprint is left behind when people pass over, I definitely could connect with that when I was very young.
And this is so interesting because I'll just let the people who are watching this know, before we hit record, you and I were speaking, Naomi, about how this conversation would unfold. And you had mentioned that you were a little bit, I don't know if it was intimidated or kind of like, I don't know if I have anything that I can talk about here. Can you speak a little bit about how you were feeling when you were first approached to be a part of this series?
Well, yes, like I said, I was really excited. It was a resounding yes when you first asked me. And then when I sat with the sample questions you sent me, I was a little bit worried. I felt like I don't have any like credentials, like I don't have any training. I would never consider myself an expert. And so I was worried that I had nothing to offer as far as the conversation went.
And that's what I think is so wonderful about having these conversations, is that, my belief is that we all are intuitive, whether we realize it or not, or whether we call ourselves intuitive or not. It shows up for us in different ways. And, you don't need to have, at least I don't believe that you don't need to have a PhD in intuition and psychic abilities in order to be able to have anything of value to contribute, or in order to actually just enact and be intuitive in the real world and in your everyday life. So I was glad to be able to bring that up for people, that even the people that I'm speaking with in this series were like, oh my goodness, I don't know. Right. But then contrasting this with the fact that since that you're in the single digits, you know, you were hugely empathic, you were able to kind of sense and engage with spirits or different forms of energies. And it makes me giggle to think that someone who has those experiences would be like, I don't know.
When you put it that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And now today, in your everyday life, how do you feel that intuition predominantly kind of flows through you, or how do you perceive intuitive data or energetic data in your experience now?
A lot of how I experienced it as a child has remained, but I study and practice and teach yoga, and through the practice of yoga, I've really come to understand the divine within, and it made me, think about the word divination, which we use in intuitive practices often, and divination, connecting with divine, and we think about it as something outwards coming in. And so just taking that idea of divination and thinking about the yogic practice of finding the divine within us, I realized it wasn't a search outwards, but a search inwards. And so that's how I approach it as a practice, is instead of like tapping out into the world around me, I find it within first. I go inward and look from that perspective. With the idea that we possess all of the knowledge already within us. It's just a matter of uncovering or rediscovering it.
And how does that, like, what does that look like for you, or how does that actually work in like if you were explaining it to an alien, how do you go within, and like what does that practice actually look like when you're kind of, are you scanning your body, or are you, what does that look like for you?
It always begins with meditation. For me, meditation is the way in, just quieting down, trying to release any tension, any stress, any ruminating thoughts. Usually I will support it by burning a blessing herb, or taking a consciousness shifting tea or a tincture or something, just to help me settle. I do have a very active mind, and I'm prone to being anxious, so I need a lot of time to just sit and get still and quiet. And then once I'm able to do that and slow my breath, and then I start looking for prana, or subtlety of energy, movement. I also practice Reiki, so I might do a little bit of self Reiki on my self Reiki, and in my plant spirit apprenticeship, we've been doing a lot of journeying, like shamanic journeying, and so that also involves a period of meditation and quieting the mind and going in before you journey out. And so that's kind of how it begins, and then it can be anything. It could manifest as card pulling for me, or I might come across an ancestor or a spirit guide, or maybe it's a plant spirit or an animal totem will come and we'll have a conversation or a journey together, or I'll get some information. But that's sort of how it works for me. Sometimes it'll be like a gut feeling, like I'll feel it in my gut, instinct, and sometimes it'll be just a word or a feeling will pop up, but more often than not, it's a meditation practice.
And has this been something, I know I kind of already know the answer for you, or in general, but I just want to pull that thread of what you were saying, that it is a practice, like you're not always going to get the same, it's not the same thing every time, and you're not and you're not always going to necessarily find what you're expecting either. Like in my personal practice, I'll go in sometimes with like a specific question or a specific intention, and the way it unfolds is totally not what I would have ever
Mm-hmm.
planned or predicted. Do you feel like it's just when you're describing the way that you practice, just the energy of what you were saying just felt so, it was like dripping with devotion and dripping with this like an earnest, loving willingness to like go within. Do you feel it's like a game to you too, like playing, or is it more of that like kind of solemn hush approach going within?
I think different times can have different energies, and it can definitely be really, it can be playful. I am kind of a serious, solemn person.
Me too.
and always have been. And so it does have that. And when I'm trying to share it, like for instance on social media, I really do struggle to have that light, playful sort of attitude around it. And the way that I find that I can make it work most is if I'm just honest about what I'm feeling and experiencing. But honestly, I definitely am much more serious about the experience. It definitely is more. And and I think that I'm drawn more to shadow work and to journeying to the underworld for that reason, because I feel that where I'd be most of service is in helping people to navigate suffering and grief, and I'm very drawn to things that maybe seem a little bit more serious than others.
Yeah. And you bring up a really interesting point there too, because I think there is a misperception or a misconception that intuition is all love, light, and high vibrations.
Right.
And also that it's just very much, it's very third eye chakra, it's very crown chakra, it can be heart chakra, but then this idea that intuition can be a very deeply rooted practice, first of all, but that it can also bring you into these shadows and bring you into the underbelly of yourself or the underbelly of your fears. Do you have any specific, I guess, practices or recommendations for people who maybe want to be intuitive but are kind of afraid of doing that shadow work and of doing that, of confronting their fears? What's been helpful for you to go there and to touch the depths within yourself?
Allies, like identifying allies, having, if they're not, and not human ones, plant allies, animal allies, just something within the spirit realm that can act as a touchstone and can nurture you through the process. I definitely wouldn't be able to do it in the way that I do now without establishing a connection with the spirit that comforts and mothers and nurtures me, because it can be extremely painful and extremely terrifying. And when you come out of it, you want to never go back and do it again. And so if you have some kind of tether to something loving, then it makes it a lot easier, I feel.
And how do you find, or how do you select an ally to be that touchstone, or to be that rope back to
I think it can
light?
happen in two ways. Right, exactly. And I think that it can happen in a couple of ways, or for me, it's happened in a couple of different ways. And one, it's just things that you're drawn to. What brings you joy? What makes you feel held? What makes you feel safe and comforted? Animals that I really, really feel drawn to, like deer and rabbit. I've never actually had an unintentional journey with them. Like I didn't go journeying for a spirit animal and have deer show up, but I've always been drawn to deer, and deer really grounds and nurtures me. And so it's definitely an ally for me. And then in the apprenticeship that I'm doing for sacred plant medicine, we journey with different plants just to see what happens, to see what comes up. And in that way, not knowing the plant, not knowing what to expect from that journey, I have found some of my closest allies, some of the things that I really use every day to help me move through a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I, just for people watching too, you share really amazing information and insights on your Instagram page, specifically about different plant allies. And I forget the name of the one that you had been talking about recently, but it basically kind of dissolved the armor enough that you could still be like connected and have compassion and feel the feelings, but not make it so intense that like you didn't want to feel the feelings, or that you would completely numb out or shut down. That's really intriguing to me. Like, I personally haven't done a lot of journeying or anything with plant spirits or with plant allies, but more and more I feel, actually, and even having this conversation, it's like I'm getting like the little tap on the shoulder, or like the little intuitive nudge that's like, this might be something to look into, or to participate in a little bit more moving forward. What was one of the names of that plant?
Was it bee balm? Was it that one?
Maybe.
Do you remember what the picture of it was?
Yeah, it was a jar of dirty looking. It was a jar. It was like a mason jar that had this brown elixir in it. And for some reason I thought it started with a G, maybe. But
with a G.
I'll know which post it is when I go back. I'm totally gonna go back after and be like,
this now is the one. Think.
Yeah, but yeah.
So there's so many like that for me. Actually, at this point, I could name a few if you wanted me to.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say rose does that for me.
Yeah.
And motherwort. Oh, where did you go? There you are. Motherwort does this for me. White peony really does that for me. It could have been white peony. That one is really the best, actually. I'm going to speak to white peony, because white peony has a lot of the same effects on me that rose does, but rose can really get deep into my heart, and it will be a very painful healing process. Whereas white peony has a lot of the same mothering, nurturing, heart healing energy, but it's not quite so painful. It keeps it just a little bit lighter and a little bit gentler, so it feels more like I'm tapping into divine feminine, and less like I'm really like digging into a wound. So I like that one. And that one, when I made that, it was in my stories, and it looked kind of like sludge. It was in a jar. It was sludgy, but yeah, I want to look back and see which one you were speaking to.
Yeah, me too. And then when I was describing it, I was like, there's actually a lot of photos that have brown things in jars. So that doesn't really like single it out as like, oh, that one.
Yeah.
I want to learn more about the plant allies, and as far as using them as an ally, what does that look like in practical terms? Like, are you taking tinctures, or are you making smudges of them, or does it really depend?
It depends. I do make tinctures. I will smudge some, and teas I find really helpful. Sometimes I just sit with the plant, either in nature, like right now I'm sitting in garden. I don't know if you can see.
I can, yeah. It looks
plants.
Lovely.
That's our labyrinth here at Gaia. I'll sit with them, or I'll hold a plant. Like if I have dried plant in my home, I'll hold it. But more often than not, what's the most healing and the most empowering for me is to connect to the spirit. And sometimes I don't even need the physical plant to connect to the spirit. Another one of my allies is monotropa, which is ghost flower or ghost pipe. And I worked for a year without ever having met it in the real world. Like I never had seen it before. I'd read about it. It was at a time when I was experiencing a lot of grief, and I use it to help me navigate that grief. And I call upon it whenever I really need that kind of healing, that underworld healing. And I found it for the first time this summer in the forest here, and I made a no-pick flower essence out of it. So instead of actually removing the plant from the ground, I just kind of dipped it into the water and let it sit that way for a couple hours to make an essence in that way. And so calling on the spirit itself can be very powerful if it's your ally. You won't even need to ingest it or or hold it or be with it
Mm-hmm.
physically. Yeah.
And how can people know for themselves if it's like a friend or a foe? Because like I know obviously people aren't hopefully going to be experimenting with plants that are toxic to them, but how
Right.
could they know, or how do you know inside your body what is an ally and what is something you maybe don't want to work with?
So I feel like you're probably only going to have adverse reactions to the toxic plants. And if you're just beginning, I wouldn't recommend working with them at all, except in spirit. You can definitely call on something like Datura or Foxglove in spirit. They're very protective. Even though they're poisonous plants, they're deeply protective plants. And so sometimes we need that and we don't want to ingest them. So flower essence in spirit is a great way to do that. I feel like knowing what could be your ally is sitting with it. Sometimes your ally is just your favorite flower or your favorite plant, something that makes you feel comforted and safe or strong and empowered or aware or joyful or whatever it is that you're looking to call in. You can just close your eyes and see what pops up in your mind. Having an intentional practice is a beautiful thing. So I would definitely have people maybe research something basic like Susan Weed's Healing Wise. Susan Weed is a folk herbalist in the Wise Woman tradition. She's renowned. I don't know if you've heard of her before,
I haven't, no. I'm
she has
very
a book
new
called
to the whole plant thing.
Yeah, so this would be great for you.
Yeah.
So she's got a book called Healing Wise, and it just talks about a handful of herbs that are called the nourishing herbs, and it's food grade gentle plants that you would find everywhere, like dandelion or red clover or things like that. And these, like I said, are food grade. They're nourishing. You can eat them. You're not going to get poisoned by them. You can't overdose on them. And when you're working with the folk tradition of herbalism, you want to work with things that are accessible. You want to work with things that are readily available and things that are free, things that grow natively around you, as opposed to thinking about exotic herbs or exotic plants. And beginning there, you can just go sit with your dandelion. You can pick some leaves and make tea. You could eat the flower. Red clover, same thing. You could make a tincture with the folk method really simply and just test it out, try it out, speak to it before you pick it, talk to it, ask it what it has for you, offer something to it. It's definitely like a gift of exchange. It honors you, you honor it. It's definitely a symbiotic relationship. And then slowly you begin simply and slowly, and over time, you begin to understand. That's how I started. I am not natural with plants. Like I came to plants not long ago, and was in this position where I was like, I have no idea how this is going to play out, because I am not a gardener. I'm not a botanist. Like, I don't know anything about plants. And just with time and practice, going slow, being simple, this whole world opened up for me, and I'm deeply grateful for it.
Well, and it sounds like that in itself was an intuitive journey that kind of connected you to plants and got you into an apprenticeship, and now this whole world is unfolding for you. But it wasn't something that you would have like planned for yourself or strategically decided.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you were talking about just the process of befriending plants, it sounded just like befriending people. Like when you first encounter certain people, without them having to say anything or without you having to exchange any sort of verbal communication, you can feel people, and you can get a sense right away of people that you feel drawn to, or people that just you don't vibe with for whatever reason. And it sounds like it's the same with plants, that even if you don't really know anything intellectually about them, energetically, if you just pay attention and listen to how your body's responding to it, or if this is kind of giving you a more expansive feeling, or if you're kind of like weirded out by it for whatever reason.
Exactly.
Just like people.
Yeah. Exactly.
And just like people, you might not become best friends overnight. Right?
It's true, right? It's true.
Time,
there are some clients it takes time, exactly. And there are some, that so many people love, like kava, for instance, is so relaxing for so many people. And I was like, oh, this will be really great for me. I need to relax. And my first experience with kava, I had the worst heart palpitations. I was so anxious, and it just happens that way sometimes, where it just didn't work with me and my energy and my body or whatever. But it doesn't mean it's not a great plant or a great ally. It's just not for me.
Just not for you.
Yeah.
And it's actually, this is also reminding me of tarot, that a lot of people, when they're first coming into tarot, either don't take the time or don't realize that like they might resonate with different decks more than others. They might not even realize that to begin with. Or there's this expectation that, the first time you pick up a deck, you're going to be given all the answers to the rest of your life and understand the secrets of the universe. And that's like expecting that you're going to have a one-night stand with a person and go all the way, right? Like
exactly. Get married, have kids.
But it does take time. And I know with my own just card pulling practice that I made a practice out of it. I was really intimidated by tarot to begin with, and I didn't think I'd be able to read it or that I'd know like the true or official meanings of the cards. And I set an intention that it's like, I'm going to pull a card every day and I'm just going to get to know you. Like no pressure. You can tell me about you. I'll tell you about me. And it was just like starting a friendship with this deck. And I don't know exactly when it happened, but there was a shift where all of a sudden I felt like I knew the deck, right? And like we had a connection and we had established this relationship together. And like everything intuitive, it takes time and it takes practice.
It does. Yeah. I fully agree with that, especially about tarot. I had the same experience. And then some decks where you just like, you expected it to become best friends with, and it just for some reason didn't work.
I know. And decks that I really actually wanted to like, I wanted to like them and I wanted to like have a profound relationship with the decks, and it just didn't
work.
Didn't work for me. No. No. And I feel like sometimes shy or embarrassed. I don't even want to say what decks they were because
I know exactly.
So they're like, what do you mean you didn't connect with the deck that everybody connects with? Can you speak a little bit, Naomi, just about the about folk methods and folk apprenticeships compared to like a clinical apprenticeship, or not just necessarily when it comes to learning about plants, but just strengthening your own intuition, that like sometimes the path is to go to this official program or this official mentor, and sometimes it's to just like be a little bit more grassroots with it and find your own path. Can you speak a little bit about that in terms of your own intuitive journey as well?
Yes. When I finally got the message that this was the path I should be on, it was very important to me that it was a spirit-based, I guess, apprenticeship. I didn't know I was looking for an apprenticeship. I was looking for a teacher or a program or something. And over the years, I've sort of entertained the idea of entering the health field, but there's something about allopathic medicine that it's not that I don't respect it, because I do, but I don't resonate with it in my own life. And I really feel in everything that I do, the common denominator, the thread is spirit. And so I wanted my practice to be the same. And this particular one, sacred plant medicine, speaks to spirit more than, say, clinical. And clinical, I think, is much like the allopathic method in the sense that for this, take that. Like where you're like, oh, you have a headache? take this plant. Whereas with the folk tradition is really an evolution of ancestral practices. It's having a relationship with the plants in a way that really is a relationship with nature and the earth. So I really feel, I've been really thinking about this, about how, I mean, obviously it's interconnected, but there's this rhythm to the way plants grow here in the Northeast that is connected to what we experience as people. Like right now, growing is goldenrod and echinacea and all of these things that are preparing us for like cold and flu season. You know, so I have the time to tincture these things, and then I'll have the medicines for cold and flu and whatever else comes up over the winter. And there's this connected relationship between me as a human and what nature offers me. And our ancestors, they had this rhythm where they just worked with the earth in this way, and it was just the way things were done. And so the folk tradition is just is carrying that over. It's carrying that into the modern world. So we're not thinking about like illness necessarily. We're not thinking about, oh, you have a headache, take skull cap or blue vervain or something. It's more like trying to connect to the energies of what's going on. And we begin with the nourishing herbs because you want to begin by nourishing the body and nourishing the spirit. And then from there, maybe you add more, but it isn't so much about what is the thing that you take for that thing, but what works for you. For a long time, I just drank oat straw for literally everything. I was like, I have a headache, I need oat straw. I'm stressed out, I need oat straw. My belly hurts, I need oat straw, just for everything. And some folk herbalists continue to work that way. They have their one plant ally and it will solve everything for everyone because they are so deeply connected. And it isn't the medicine, like the physical constituents and components of the plant working, but it's the spiritual connection, you know, of everything working together to help bring about healing. So that's why. And it's simple, it's easy, it's accessible, it's for everyone. There's no barriers. You don't necessarily need a teacher, although I highly recommend mentors. But it belongs to everyone. You can go out and get your dandelion, go out and get your red clover, go out and get your burdock or nettles or whatever, gather it and make medicine from it. Not just your physical medicine, but your spiritual medicine, your heart medicine. It's here, it's asking to be used. And yeah,
I love that you brought that up too, because it was something that I not struggled with, but for me, like I really wanted a mentor when it came to developing my intuition, and I had a mentor that I worked with too. But the fact is, you don't need one. Like you don't have to have one. Just like with the plant medicine, these intuitive abilities are built in, right? Like you can choose whatever path you want to develop them. And for some people, having a teacher and having a mentor or taking a program, whatever, like that works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody, and that's okay. And just because you maybe haven't taken a certification in something or worked with a famous mentor, it doesn't make your experience and your knowledge any less valid than someone who has taken those programs.
Exactly. And the folk tradition really honors that. It honors that.
If somebody is just starting out on their path, like maybe just on the verge of recognizing themselves as someone who can be intuitive or as somebody who is intuitive, what kind of first steps would you recommend or offer to someone who's in that position right now?
I would definitely recommend a meditation practice. I feel like getting connected to yourself, being able to quiet the mind a bit more, being able to get into that still place where you can empty of all that stuff floating around in your head and in your energetic field, so you can open up to what you already know. That would be the beginning, I think.
And just to add to that, the meditation practice can be anything. You know, it could be a seated meditation, it could be a chanting meditation, it Could be a moving meditation, but just anything that that, like you say, that kind of turns down the volume on the external noise and just allows you to come into your own center. Yeah, that's a beautiful suggestion. Thank you so much. It was just so, my heart feels so full getting a chance to speak with you, and I'm already like, yes, yes, universe, I hear you about the plant allies.
Exactly.
How many times? I'm sure the universe is like, finally, like, how many times have we had to like tap her on the shoulder about this? So I'm like, gotcha. I'm gonna go look back on that post, see what see that one particular one that you had mentioned, but then also,
yes, please, and then make a little comment so I know.
Okay, I will. And then also, I'm just going to listen back to this recording and get the information about those the nourishing herbs and plants to start out with, because I think that that would be, I feel like this is also my next step.
Yeah, wonderful. I love that. Oh my God, everyone should do it.
Everyone should do it. And I am the next to jump on that bandwagon.
Yay!
And if people wanted to learn more about you, or if they wanted to follow your journey online, what's the best place for them to connect with you?
I would say Instagram.
Instagram? I'll put the link below so that people can just click on it without you having to spell it all out.
Yay!
Well, thank you again for having this conversation with me. I really, really appreciate it, Naomi.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a beautiful, pleasurable experience. I'm really grateful.
Awesome. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.